"You're looking at it," he said. The wind moved softly through the trees. The scent of damp earth, along with something faintly chemical, lingered in the air. The man stood still, almost casual, as he gestured towards a spot near the brush. Another one of the men stepped forward. They saw something blue, fabric perhaps, barely poking through the forest floor. Another man reached for his phone to mark the location. They didn't move quickly, they didn't need to, because the man who had led them to this spot, to this moment in time, had been laughing with them over drinks just hours earlier, and he was now standing in the silence of the trees, a strange mixture of calm and emotionless panic. He'd already said too much. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, then join the Dark Case family now by hitting subscribe and turning all notifications on. And now for today's silly little question, although this one's not really very silly. What's the most unsettling thing you've ever accidentally found online? Let me know down in the comments. All of your support over on Patreon and via channel memberships are so appreciated, and I really can't thank you enough, but you know I'm still going to say thank you. But now, on with the video. When Jasmine Lovett met Robert Leeming, she thought she was making a positive change and a smart move in her young life. She was 25, a single mother, and was trying to build a steady life for her daughter, Aliyah. The new couple met on a dating app in the autumn of 2018. Robert was older, he was British, outdoorsy, and he was polite. He owned a townhome in a good part of Calgary. He said all the right things, and he even seemed to like kids. He was something of a unicorn in a stressful dating scene. Within just 1 month, Jasmine and Aliyah had moved in. Jasmine didn't want to take advantage of a kind man, and this wasn't a decision that she made on a whim, so she paid rent, she split groceries, and she still kept her level of independence. But this felt like the beginning of something, the kind of partnership that could really grow and blossom. Jasmine's family wasn't alarmed by this new relationship. Robert had joined them for dinners, he helped out with Aliyah, and he played the part of a family man well. Jasmine didn't post too much on social media, but when she did, it was thoughtful. There'd be pictures of Aliyah playing, notes about job interviews, plans for her and her daughter's future. So all in all, this seems like a positive chapter in her life. And the three of them lived this way for about 6 months. And it wasn't completely perfect, but it was working. But then, little by little, things started to shift. What Jasmine nor her family knew was that Robert Leeming was not the man that they thought he was. He was once married to a woman named Sarah, however they were now divorced, and that relationship had been marred by Robert's maltreatment of her. He was controlling, coercive and generally abusive towards her. He had this whole life before meeting Jasmine, and the warning signs were there. Robert had in fact moved to Canada to be with Sarah, and the two of them bought the house together in Cranston, the very same house that Jasmine and Aliyah would move into. They'd even had a son together as well as a family dog, but Robert tore that family apart, which then left him rattling around that townhouse alone and reeling. Robert became strangely distant. He'd stay out late without explanation. Jasmine began to wonder if he was seeing another woman. By spring, her text messages to her sister began to hint at doubts, not just about the relationship, but about the man she was living with in general. Still, there was no screaming fight, there was no dramatic exit, just a dull, growing tension. And Jasmine, ever steady, was still focused on making things work. Her daughter deserved that. She couldn't allow her child to live in a negative environment. In fact, that was the complete opposite of what she wanted. I'm over 300 cases deep on this channel now, and I still find myself wishing that somehow the course of these stories could be changed. Looking at this photo of the mother and daughter, deeply in love, I wish this wasn't their final photo together, but it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. Jasmine's hand on her daughter's shoulder, Aliyah smiling. You'd never know from looking at it. Their time on this earth was almost up. April the 16th, a Tuesday, Aliyah was picked up from daycare at around 4 p.m. She then had a snack at home as usual. Jasmine had been out for part of the day, going on job interviews and running some errands. But by evening, everyone was back at the Cranston townhouse. Then it was dinner, TV, and the kind of quiet routine that people seem to yearn for. At some point that evening, Jasmine texted her sister to confirm Easter dinner plans. This was coming up that Friday. They would bring dessert, she said, and they were looking forward to it. Again, normal, positive, and aiming towards the future. However, that was the last time that Jasmine's phone sent a message. There were no calls after that, no social media posts, no more happy photos. Obviously, people sometimes go dark on their phone, and that's fine. But what happened next is when alarm bells started to quietly ring out. Aliyah didn't show up at daycare the next day, and then there was just an eerie silence. Jasmine's mum tried to call her, then called her again and again. There was no answer, no voicemail. The phone would just ring out. By Thursday, the worry started to swell. Jasmine's family checked the townhouse, but nobody answered the door. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. The porch was clear, and a single light glowed from the basement window. The family felt the absence from the meal on Friday, and by Sunday, Easter came and went, with 2 empty chairs around the table. There was no word, no update, and no peace for the family. 4 days later, Jasmine and Aliyah were officially reported missing, and by then, something was already terribly wrong. After 1 week of not being heard from or seen, Calgary police opened a missing persons case on April the 23rd. Jasmine and her toddler had not been seen in several days. An officer knocked on the door of Robert Leeming's home. He answered calmly. He said that Jasmine and Aliyah had already moved out, but he didn't know where they'd gone, and he didn't seem too worried. As officers stepped inside, they noted that the home was tidy, but almost unnaturally so.
Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Alright, well, we're just going to take a quick look around. We need to have a look.
So, sorry, you're Robert?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
You didn't answer the door.
I was sleeping. I sleep with plugs in and...
hey, well, we've been here for hours and hours and hours now, hey? Banging on your door and...
ringing the doorbell.
Calling your phone.
I've been drinking and smoking a lot, so
Okay.
I'm fucked up.
Okay, so she's not with her sister.
What do you mean?
Well, that's the reason that we're here,
I think we're here.
is that the family's calling us, saying we haven't heard from our daughter and our sister.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense?
Yeah,
Okay, why does that make sense?
because I haven't heard from her either.
Okay. So, did you guys get in some sort of argument?
No, but I'm aware.
Well, not that you're aware of. Like, you're not making a whole lot of sense to me, here, guy.
like, I don't know what. Sorry, I'm still getting my bearings here. So she's not with her family, but she did threaten to move out. I don't know, like 3 weeks ago, we got into a tizzy. She threw a bunch of my stuff out, food, stuff like that, and I had a discussion about that. But nothing like that would concern me.
Nothing that would concern you. Okay.
Like, I mean, I've had people living with me before, and they move out. You don't hear
Right,
from
but this isn't just like a roommate. This is your girlfriend.
them. No, it's more roommate than girlfriend.
Okay.
She's more of a roommate than a girlfriend?
Yeah.
So, the last time that you saw Jasmine was when?
Thursday.
Okay. And at that time, you guys were A-okay or fighting, or what was the status?
I would say in the air, judging by what obviously has gone down with hers, and she's not here, and we're looking for her, so.
So what makes you believe that she's with her sister?
She told me that she was going to go and spend Easter with them on Tuesday. He was talking about it because I don't have my son, so, you know, it's kind of depressed about that. And just, you know, drink, a lot of drinking a lot over the weekend because I've probably been on my own, right?
Okay.
Does she have a card?
I don't know.
No, she doesn't have a license. As
Or
far as
niece?
I'm aware.
That's from mom.
We got a phone number for the sister.
No, I'll have to phone Mom and start digging, but that doesn't jive.
What's the saran wrap for?
No.
Just privacy.
Privacy. Did you see the note on the door?
I do now.
Okay. I'm gonna go make a call to Mom and try and get some more info.
Later that day, detectives seized Leeming's phone. They found all of Jasmine's messages deleted, but not gone. Over 30 photographs of her and Aliyah had also been deleted, some of which just earlier that day. Police uncovered text messages, and they were kind of odd. Messages sent from Robert to Jasmine's number after she'd supposedly already moved out. There was one to say that he'd taken Aliyah to daycare, another suggested getting pizza for dinner, and then a week later, more. Hey, haven't seen you in a couple of days. Just wondering when you were going to grab the rest of your things. Another said, hey, you okay? CPS is looking for you. Please call me. It's urgent. Or call 911. None of these messages, though, had actually been received.
She could melt the world with her smile, I always said.
Aliyah Sanderson's smile stood out.
Most part, she was a happy-go-lucky girl trying to sing before she could talk, trying to run before she could walk. She was amazing.
It's that happy image Aliyah's grandma is focusing on, and her aunt on the last time she saw the 22-month-old.
And I came down my stairs and she smiled from ear to ear and scooped her up, gave her a hug and a kiss and, you know, told her how much I loved her. I can't say enough about her as a mom. Once Aliyah came, you know, as most moms, her life became all about her. And it was a great bond to see grow over the last couple of years.
Police now knew that something was very, very wrong. In interviews with reporters outside a local pub, he told the cameras that he had nothing to hide, and he referred to Jasmine as just being a tenant. He said that police had the wrong guy. However, his story was already starting to unravel.
You were kind of the primary suspect in this homicide investigation. You still are. What are your thoughts about that, and what are your emotions right now? What's kind of going through your head?
It's very stressful, but I hope they will be found, and I hope we can move forward from this. No, we were friends, absolutely friends, and supported each other. I would like, obviously, for them to be found, and for me to be cleared of this.
By early May, Calgary police were running out of patience. Robert Leeming by this time had been arrested once, but he was subsequently released. This is because there was no hard evidence yet, just a sneaking suspicion, along with mounting inconsistencies.
Now, last night, he also came out for a brief moment after police knocked on his door. And then shortly after that, he came out again. A reporter from the Daily Mirror in the UK conducted an interview with him at his doorstep. And of course, our camera was there as well. Now, Leeming is a British citizen, which is why this has caught the attention of the UK press. Now, the 34-year-old said in this interview that he is exhausted and he has been drinking for 3 days. Now, since his arrest, he was taken in for questioning last week. He says people have made it up in their minds, saying, quote, "You're guilty before you are proven innocent." He tells the reporter his electronics have been seized, leaving him unable to reach any of his family members. He also says that his friends have abandoned him as well. Now, he maintains his innocence and says all he wants is for Jasmine and Aliyah to be found.
This is when they made the decision to launch an undercover operation. It was called Operation Highwood. 2 officers approached Leeming near his home. They played it cool. They claimed to recognise him from the news, and they said they'd found a bag of evidence in the woods that had been left by a nosy neighbour. They hinted that it could get him into trouble, and Robert took the bait. Over drinks at a local pub, he opened up. He told them that someone had tried to expose him and that it had ended badly. The officers didn't push, they just listened, they nodded along, and they bought another round. One insane thing that came from this undercover investigation was the revelation that Robert hung pieces of bacon around his house, and he thought he'd really done something genius with that one. You see, Robert thought the smell of death was lingering in his home, and that it would be that smell that would be the thing that would get him caught by the cops. So draping bacon over chairs and in other places was his way of avoiding the justice that he felt was about to come crashing down onto him. He also put mulch in his car boot for the same reason, but that's just not as funny. Anyway. 4.5 hours later, Robert agreed to take a drive. He said he could show them something they might want to see. The undercover officers followed him west of Calgary, past the streetlights, into the foothills of the Rockies. He led them off the main road, down a ditch, and into a patch of trees. The area was quiet. The air had that late spring bite. He pointed at the brush and said the now infamous words, "You're looking at it." What the officers saw was fabric, something blue wrapped around something else. They told him not to touch anything. And just like that, the missing persons case was over, and the real questions had only just begun. The bodies of both of them were found near Grizzly Creek, in a wooded area just off Highway 40. It was a quiet, rugged spot, used mostly by hikers and families in the summer. Jasmine and Aliyah had been buried side by side, dumped in a shallow grave. They were wrapped in blankets, their heads covered in blue plastic. A stroller lay disassembled nearby, and burnt debris, burnt evidence, had been scattered throughout a culvert. The smell of fuel still lingered in the soil. When the forensics team arrived, they found other fragments, including a cursive writing book, bits of charred fabric, and the sole of a tiny shoe. It was a grave that was meant to be hidden. It was just not a well-planned one. Robert Leeming's vehicle was clean, but it wasn't perfect. A blanket found in his trunk actually matched the ones used to conceal the bodies. He was arrested once again, obviously. Even then, he didn't admit to everything. He maintained that Aliyah's end had been an accident, that Jasmine had blamed him, and that's when he snapped. However, the evidence would tell another story, a story that the justice system would spend 2 more years untangling. Once Robert Leeming was in custody, detectives played back the audio from the bar and the dump site. There was 4.5 hours of conversation with the undercover officers, and in this vast wealth of evidence, Robert never once claimed that Aliyah's passing was accidental. Instead, he joked about the car's GPS being too old to track him. He said if he'd been driving a newer Mercedes, that he'd already be in jail. He described the burial site in detail. He described the best parking spots, which rock to look for, and how to maneuver past the gate without being seen. A rare and detailed confession. Later, under formal interrogation, Robert offered up a version of events. Aliyah, he claimed, had fallen down the stairs. He said she seemed fine at first, but hours later she was limp and unresponsive. It was then that Jasmine came home, checked on her daughter, and then turned on him, accused him of doing this on purpose, and he says that's when he lost control. He admitted striking Jasmine with a hammer twice, then going to the garage for a .22 caliber rifle. He lined the sights at her head, and then came the blast. Robert insisted I didn't kill Aliyah. He said he just panicked, that he didn't know what else to do, but that version never really made too much sense. Not to the police, not to Jasmine's family, frankly not to me, and not to the medical examiner who had seen the damage that he'd done. Dr. Akmal Kotsi Khan had performed the autopsy on Aliyah Sanderson. He took the stand and didn't speak in absolutes. He wasn't there to speculate. He was there just to explain and describe what he'd seen. Aliyah had 3 distinct skull fractures. There were scalp hematomas. There was pressure on the surface of the brain and spinal cord. But could an accidental fall down the stairs cause such injuries? Possibly, he said, but it would be unusual. There were no other notable markings like scrapes on the arms, bruises on her legs or back, nor were there any defensive injuries. And if she really had tumbled, her limbs should have shown signs of impact, but they didn't. Dr. Kotsi Khan ruled her death a homicide. This wasn't because of any single thing, but a combination of everything that was there and that wasn't there. Added to this was the fact that he didn't call for help. There was no trace of an ambulance or calls to 911. Instead, she was wrapped in a blanket and buried in the woods, left beside her mother under mulch and tree branches. These weren't the actions of someone who simply thought there'd been an accident. This was someone hiding what they'd done. By the way, I just discovered this during the editing process, but the reason that Robert gave as to why he didn't call 911 is that he couldn't find his phone and he thought he'd left it in his car. Absolutely crazy. Robert's defense team held firm. They argued there was no proof that their client had intentionally hurt Aliyah. They said there was no witnesses and that there'd been no confession, only circumstantial evidence. They leaned heavily on the uncertainty in the pathologist's testimony, on the idea that it wasn't impossible that Aliyah fell.
This type of case just has emotions for people, and most people want to find somebody guilty for that. It's just a reaction. Somebody needs to pay, someone needs to be held responsible. But in our system of justice, it just doesn't work that way.
In his closing arguments, Crown Prosecutor Doug Taylor said Leeming committed a murder to get away with murder. Taylor pointed to what he called the most damning evidence of all, when Leeming told undercover officers he killed Lovett because someone tried to expose who I am, and it ended bad. The Crown said Aliyah is dead because of something Jasmine accused him of. The forensic pathologist testified there were injuries to Aliyah's area. The Crown suggested that is the motive for murdering them both.
However, Justice Keith Yamauchi had listened closely. He'd watched Robert on the stand, and what he saw was a man not believable. A man whose lies were manifest throughout his testimony. The judge acknowledged that the pathologist had considered other explanations, but also ruled that Robert's version of events was inconsistent, implausible, and dishonest. He said that Aliyah had not passed by accident, something that the appeal court would later agree on. In fact, they called the trial judge extremely generous in even considering Robert's story. They upheld both convictions. Robert Leeming had murdered them both, and for that he would serve life in prison with no chance of parole for 22 years. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.